This is TWiT.
One of these whiskeys that I'm going to talk about two different whiskeys because they're both from the same distillery is very well suited to a Boilermaker or a nog, as somebody suggested as well.
Oh, I love nogs. I'm all in the nogs. I'm all up. Yeah.
Listen, I mean, I like whiskey. I think you know that.
Yeah. I think so.
And I'm pretty good at telling stories about whiskey too.
Yeah, I think so.
And a couple of shows ago, I thought, I'm going to go talk about Fiddick 12 because Fiddick 12 is like the original staple single malt. If a bar has any single malt, it has Fiddick 12. If you're going visiting family and they have a single malt, it's probably a Fiddick. And I want to just give it respect because it's the original. Granton Sons really defined the concept of the single malt. They turned it into a marketing thing, and it went on from there. And of course, if I was going to talk about Glenfiddich, having toured that distillery, I had to talk about Balvenie the following week because they're literally on the same grounds. And I generally know a fair bit about these things. Like I write a lot of this out of my head, but then I go fact check myself, right? Because do I remember incorrectly? Is there other details I could go into? Double checking years. And I just landed in a rabbit hole. Like Granton Sons have been up to stuff that I never knew about. And that's what today's distillery is. Today's distillery is another Granton Sons distillery called Kininvie. Now, is it really a distillery? That's an interesting question. Because in 1990, when Balvenie was rocking it, this was their second brand that really went big on the single malts. When whiskey was ascended again in the beginning, they needed to build another distillery. They didn't have a lot of room. So they literally grabbed the property next door and they built a set of stills directly adjacent to Balvenie. In fact, they had 3 wash stills and 3 spirit stills, and they for the most part, just piped it straight into Balvenie production just to try and keep up with demand because they were so busy. But as they got things under control and actually grew the primary distillery some more, they started doing experiments with this other set of stills and doing separate agings with them as well. And so they created a new brand called Hazelwood for the Hazelwood single malts, and which is not to be confused with a new product they're now making, same group, which is now a blend called Hazelwood. And Hazelwood actually comes from the name of the Grant family estate. It's called Hazelwood. So that's where the name came from. And so through the 90s, they made a few of these, and they're fairly hard to find. They didn't make the production lots were very small. They were typically only sold in Scotland. And they're largely off the market now. Around 2011, so after 20 years or so of doing this, they went quiet for a while. And then they rebranded in 2013 to call themselves Kininvie. And that was around the time that they started making more blends. So now they were starting to produce some blends, and we'll talk about this a little bit more further on. But only the stills were separate. All of the mash work, all of the barley work and so forth was done in Balvenie. Now, it was different barley. It was a different grist. They treat it differently, but they would get it up to the wash stage, and then they would pump the wort over to the stills in Kininvie and distill it. And then they'd feed it back into the barrel system in Balvenie, but they'd rack the barrels a little differently and handle them. So is it really a different distillery? Because it's kind of just directly connected to it, but they made a few unusual whiskeys along the way. And if you go research the Hazelwood collection, there's only a half a dozen of them, and they typically only have a few hundred bottles of each, sometimes less, priced anywhere between about $1,200 and $7,500 US per bottle. And you have to be a member of the Hazelwood collection, which just to sign up on a form to even have the option to buy them. And if I was going to recommend one, if you're looking for, one to get me for a present, perhaps the Spirit of Scotland 46, which is a 43.6 ABV, runs about $1,500 US. There's only 500 bottles in the world. Now, wait, didn't you say this whole thing started in the 1990s? How did they make a 46 when they've been around for 30 years? How odd. So in 1990, this is how this whiskey called the Spirit of Scotland came to be. 1994, Granton Sons, so that's the larger collective entity that is Fiddick and Balvenie and so forth, made a Spirit of Scotland 500th anniversary edition. Now, what was the 500th anniversary? It was the 500th anniversary of the first recorded reference to Scottish whiskey in 1494 on the Exchequer Rolls of Scotland. And so Granton Sons, anticipating this, had taken a few of their best barrels from their stills and had put them aside. They made an 18-year-old they called the 500th anniversary edition. They priced it very high and it didn't sell particularly well. And they kept a bunch in, they actually relayed it into barrels and put it away again. This whole Kininvie thing happened. And in 2022, it was 46 years old. And so they've rebottled it now as the House of Hazelwood's Spirit of Scotland 46. In between these times, in 2019, they created another brand they called Kininvie Works, where they made weird whiskeys, things that would not be considered Scottish whiskey. They did a run, just a few of them, with mixed mash bills. So they did a triple distillation that was aged in bourbon casks for 5 years, which is very like Woodford Reserve-ish. They did a mixed mash bill in Scotland, like heresy. 89% malted barley, 11% rye in Virgin American oak for 3 years. Again, very bourbony. And then they did another mixed mash bill with more barley and less grain, but then mixed it in with European oak. And they only sold them on Amazon. You can find a few at auction. Don't bother. They were just experiments. It's weird. The whiskey you have heard of that's part of this entire system is Monkey Shoulder.
That's a terrible name.
So Monkey Shoulder is the name for a pain that that maltmen get. So when you're turning the malt, the strain of the shovel of lifting that malt, turning it over, gives you monkey shoulder.
Well.
Monkey shoulder is made by Granton Sons. It's actually made in the Kininvie distillery, and it is a blended malt. Okay, not just a blended whiskey, a blended malt. So there's no grain alcohol in it. It's just a blend of malts, typically Fiddick, Balvenie, and what comes from the Kininvie stills. It's the third best selling Scottish whiskey in the world.
What?
After Johnny Walker and the Macallan. What? It's about $40. And it's very drinkable, but it is a blended malt.
It's kind of made for, it looks like from the website, mixing, like boiling.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a party. And they say, if you want to make a whiskey nog, make it with shoulder. And listen, drink's fine. Throw a couple of ice cubes in it. Like, there's nothing wrong with this whiskey. It's perfectly drinkable. But it comes from the same distillery that also wants to sell you a $1,500 bottle of only one of 500 limited edition 46-year-olds. And so, is it really a distillery? It's interesting, right? And then the thing is, I'm not to the bottom of the crazy Grant things yet. There's more. But I'm going to take a break. I think that was enough. But because Kininvie was directly tied to Balvenie, I thought it was important to tell a story alongside.
It's really interesting.
Plus, you get that double combination of you can build very rare old whiskeys, but you can also make a super popular blended malt through the same system.
Is whiskey like port or something, like it gets better the older it is? Or is there a point at which, beyond which you do not wish to?
That's a phenomenal question, and it's very challenging to answer it. I have on a couple of barrel tours with a master distiller thiefed directly from a 50-year-old that drank like tar.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I was like thick vinegar.
It gets very strong. Okay. And so they're typically used in small proportions, right? Like when it says 46 on the bottle, that just means it's the youngest thing in there. Although in the case of that particular edition, which was already a blended edition, it's actually a blend.
Right.
That Spirit of Scotland, it's all 46 because it was all barreled at the same time. But most of the special editions, and I didn't get into this in Balvenie, but like one of my very, very favorite whiskeys is their Ton 1509, which they only do limited releases every few years of. And there's often 50 in the Ton 1509, but they don't even put a year on it because they only use a little bit of 50 for the flavor of it. No, it's not certain that whiskey gets better with age. And it's not like you put it in a barrel and say, 12 years from now, that's going to be amazing. You don't know. You barrel it up and then you check it at an interval every few years and you're looking for flavor profiles. And one of your dangers is the alcohol level is dropping over time. Depending on where it's laying in the barrel rooms, it may be going faster or slower. But if it falls below 40%, you cannot sell it as whiskey. And so barrelmen often will see a particular production run some years in getting low. It's getting into below 50 and they'll get rid of it. They'll offload it to to McPhail or one of the other barrelers or bottlers because it isn't fitting the flavor profile of what they want to make, and they want to sell it while it still has some value. But sometimes they go really well, and sometimes you'll do like a flora and fauna bottling like Diageo does, where this is a special edition. You don't know. It's taste. You have to feel for it, and it's part of the magic of this whole process. Is that the climate matters. Those barrels breathe over the year. Warmer in the summer, cooler in the winter. More wood absorption versus more expiration. It depends. And so seasons matter. Different years have different effects. It's never certain. Where that barrel sat in the barrel room matters. What that particular lineage of the wood matters. And so you can't be certain. And the genius, the absolute genius of a single malt whiskey like a Macallan 12 or a Balvenie 12 is that it tastes like Balvenie 12 every year. Somebody made that. They selected the barrels to make an assembly that tastes like Macallan 12. How do you do that? Those guys are geniuses.
Yeah.
Man, I thought I could wax poetic about beer. But
I know. It's amazing, isn't it? Beer is just beer, but whiskeys, it's like...
beer,
it's just beer.
There's barrel aged too, and they're all the same constraints and complications, but yeah.
I love how, they'll take beer barrels and they'll age whiskey in it.
That's right. And vice versa.
Age beer,
Yep.
right? It's beautiful.
Yep.
It's beautiful.
Yes.